Like I said in the previous video, it was imperative that the Warriors came away with that victory in Game 1 because Steph Curry got injured, and if they ended up losing that game, man, it would have looked really bad for the Warriors because news broke out that Steph Curry suffered a grade 1 hamstring strain, and he will be out for at least the next week or so. Honestly, from a long-term standpoint, that is the best news that we could have gotten, because if it was anything worse than a grade 1 strain, the season would have been over. No Steph Curry, the Warriors are not getting out of the second round. But because they were able to come away with the win in the first game, the Warriors have already done their job in terms of stealing home court advantage. It was obviously greedy to think that they can also win Game 2 without Steph Curry. Although they did make a bit of a run in that third quarter, and we'll get to that. But before we do, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and hit that like button so that this video gets out to all the Warriors fans out there. So getting straight to this game. At this juncture of the season, all you can do is hope and pray that whoever Steve Kerr decides to put into the rotation plays really well, regardless of what's happened throughout the course of the season. Now that Steph Curry is out, you hope that guys are able to step up into bigger roles and that enough of them can give us a surprise like Buddy Hield did over the last couple of games. So when it was announced before the game that Quinton Post would be in the starting lineup in place of Steph Curry, you know how I generally feel about Quinton Post being in rotation in the playoffs, let alone in the starting lineup. The Warriors have been terrible in probably 95% of the games that Quinton Post has started this season in the regular season. So to think that that's going to work in the playoffs is pretty comical. But at the same time, I'm just hoping that he gets off to a really good start. The team is looking for him to shoot the ball early on and he makes an immediate impact and all this kind of stuff. The problem is, when the Warriors start games, they never really start out purposeful. Under Steve Kerr, they're always kind of just getting into the flow of things. They're never really running any specific plays to get anybody going. And in that scenario, Quinton Post is really useless because they're not really looking to get him shots, and his presence on the defensive end of the floor is going to slow everything down for the Warriors. And if you don't believe me, I want you to go take a look at all the games that Quinton Post has started and look at the first quarters of each of those games. The Warriors come out with a huge deficit almost every time. It's almost like a handicap that they have to overcome. So yes, despite knowing these things, I still rooted for him and hoped for the best. Unfortunately, the Timberwolves got out to a 13-0 start in the first 3 minutes of the game. And Steve Kerr had to immediately adjust and bring in some smaller guys into the game. I believe it was GP2 and Moody. And they started to get it going just a little bit. Jimmy Butler started to score. I believe he scored the first 5 points for the team. And then the second group of guys came in. It was Kevon Looney and Jonathan Kuminga. And honestly, it's the same thing for Jonathan Kuminga. You all know how I feel about him at this point. But as long as he's going to get an opportunity to play, I'm hoping that he does well. And the first few minutes were not good. And I'm going to say this. I think Steve Kerr put everybody that was in the game during that time in position to fail. Because look at this lineup. It is Pat Spencer, GP2, and Moses Moody. It's a 3-guard lineup. Why? You're already weak defensively there. And then at the power forward spot, where Jonathan Kuminga does not belong, that's exactly where Steve Kerr puts him at. And Kevon Looney, who ultimately, you're putting Looney in position to fail because he can't anchor that. He's got no help across the board. Kuminga is not a 4. As a matter of fact, almost immediately, he gets to a rebound, but he gets out-muscled by Dante DiVincenzo, gets the ball stolen, and then a 3-pointer is given up. So, just like how the starters were absolutely awful to begin this game, that second unit also ended up being absolutely dreadful. They were also a -10 in the first 3 minutes that they played. But again, I don't put that on these players. I don't blame that on Kevon Looney. I don't blame that on Jonathan Kuminga. I don't blame that on the 3 guards that were on the floor. That is Steve Kerr's decision to try those guys. And you have had Jonathan Kuminga on this team for 4 years. And if you still don't understand that you put him at power forward and there's limited help from the 3-guard situation, there's just no power there. You're going to get screwed. And you want to hear something really crazy. Steve Kerr played 14 players in the first half of this game. A 14-player rotation in the playoffs. That is the definition of a coach who has no idea what to do. So I just really think the Warriors mostly lost the game in that first quarter. 29-15 deficit to start out, no Steph Curry. It's already a lot to overcome. You look at the rest of the game, and the Timberwolves outplayed the Warriors in each quarter just a little bit. And that was with them having a seismic lead to start the game. Maybe it looks completely different if Steve did a better job with the rotations to begin with. Not start Quinton Post, but a defensive guy next to Draymond and Jimmy Butler, and they would have set a better tone. And you know, in that first quarter, Steve brought in Guy Santos, and we saw that 3-forward iteration that I've always wanted to see, which is Guy Santos, Jimmy Butler, and Draymond, and that unit played pretty well. Actually, in a quarter where the Warriors were in an utter deficit, Guy Santos was the only player in rotation that was a positive. He was a +4, and he played 4 minutes. And then to begin the second quarter, Guy Santos plays 1 minute. He had one play where Nickeil Alexander-Walker drove by him, and essentially, Guy Santos didn't see another minute in the first half of this game. It's funny how selective Steve is when it comes to one guy makes a single mistake and he's out for the rest of the game, whereas other guys make mistakes and they can just stay on the floor all day and night. And we're talking about like second-year players here. Take a wild guess which player I'm talking about. So forget all the good stuff that Guy Santos was able to do in that first quarter. Let's just take that one single play and determine that he's no longer worth playing. It just doesn't make any sense. If the same play happens over and over, like 2, 3, 4 times or something, then I would understand. Oh, this guy is getting burned every time. We can't have him on the floor anymore. But to see it happen one time and then determine that he can't be played anymore is absolutely preposterous. Anyway, the second quarter comes and guess who enters the game? Trayce Jackson-Davis. Never thought I'd see the day, but he actually ended up playing a chunk of that second quarter because he was playing really well and really effective at helping the defense and helping the team stay afloat on both ends of the floor. And Kuminga played a bunch of minutes in that quarter as well. And even though once again he had fundamental issues, he finally came through in a big way in terms of scoring the ball. He went 5 of 5 from the floor in that first half. And then in the second half of the game, Quinton Post is taken out and Steve Kerr decides to put in Kuminga into the equation. So again, at that point, you're concerned because the Jimmy Butler, Jonathan Kuminga, Draymond combination has historically not been good. That's part of the reason why Jonathan Kuminga ultimately ended up being out of the rotation because he wasn't really fitting in with Kuminga. But in that third quarter, the Warriors got out to a really good start. Jonathan Kuminga is in the starting lineup now. And you're just kind of praying that the defense holds up. And it did end up holding up. The Timberwolves came out really flat. Anthony Edwards suffered an ankle sprain in that second quarter. He got blocked at the rim by Trayce Jackson-Davis, who came down and ended up stepping on Anthony Edwards' foot. But he decides to push through. But again, to start that third quarter, the Timberwolves really didn't have a whole lot going. And Jimmy Butler started to get more aggressive. He had 8 points in the first 5 minutes or so of that third quarter. And Jonathan Kuminga also chipped in with 4 points, including one notable play where he was at the 3-point line and instead of settling for the 3-point shot, he had Rudy Gobert on him. So he simply just drove around Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is too slow to keep up with Kuminga, and by the time Rudy Gobert catches up, Kuminga is dunking the ball at the rim. Next possession down, Draymond Green steals the ball from Anthony Edwards. The Warriors are out in transition, and Buddy Hield, who to that point hadn't done a whole lot, finds himself open in the left corner, and he cans a 3, and next thing you know, the Warriors erase a 17-point deficit into a 7-point deficit. So at that point, they have a lot of momentum, and you're just like, oh my goodness, this is a game again. But this is where the Warriors start to let the game get away from them. They allow Naz Reid to get an open look from the 3-point shot. It's a 10-point lead. Kuminga ends up hitting a 3-point shot of his own, and it's such a hit or miss when it comes to Kuminga taking 3-point shots, but you just hope that anytime he does take it, he takes it with confidence, and he did so on that shot, and so it's back to a 7-point game. And the next couple of possessions, the Warriors really lost some great momentum, because Pods had a couple of bad stretches there, leaving Dante DiVincenzo wide open from the 3-point shot. You cannot leave that guy wide open. And he ends up hitting a 3-point shot. Next possession down. Potts is attacking downhill. He's trying that Pinoy step, and it's not working. He's stuck. He has to pass the ball out, but it gets stolen, and Jaden McDaniels ends up getting out in transition. And suddenly it's a 12-point game again. But you know, that starting unit ultimately was still winning against the Wolves. And instead of making minor substitutions, Steve Kerr basically sits all of his starters and brings in 4 different guys from the bench. And unfortunately, this was a disastrous game for Pat Spencer and Moses Moody. Moses Moody hasn't shown up for like the last 3 games. I mean, talk about inconsistency. This is the problem with all these young players that are on the Warriors, is that they're all just very inconsistent. You need guys that show up consistently, at least on one end of the floor. And unfortunately, he's just completely overmatched against a guy like Jaden McDaniels. So he's just throwing up desperate heaves left and right. The Warriors are not creating anything off the motion offense. It's too methodical. The Warriors need to go to a different offensive game plan. They need to go downhill way more. Especially if you have Kuminga on the floor, you should have the guy going downhill as much as possible. It just can't be motion offense all day and night. That stuff gets limiting even when Steph Curry is in there oftentimes. It only started to get better once Jimmy Butler also got into the equation. But for a long time, the motion offense with Steph Curry in it was very ineffective. The Warriors have to look to get easier buckets. And the motion offense is not creating enough good shots for them in this series without Steph Curry. I mean, still run your stuff, but with younger guys in the equation, you have to simplify the offense and you have to run stuff that is most optimal for some of these players. So now that Trace is in the equation, now that Kuminga is in the equation, you're going to have to run more pick and rolls, simple high screen action where you got guys going downhill one way or the other. And as for Buddy Hield, instead of having him constantly move around, and not being effective enough now that he's more of a primary focus for the Timberwolves, Buddy Hield shoots best when he's standing still. So use more basic stuff like a horn set, do some double drag screens, and see if you can get Buddy Hield consistently some better looks. Obviously, in order to do that, you need two bigs and you need some good screeners. And one good thing about that is that Trayce Jackson-Davis appears to be back in the rotation. Finally, it's about time. Run simple stuff for the personnel that is in the rotation. Get Buddy Hield more open with more screens, get the explosive finishers going downhill more, and make sure you have a guy that knows how to look for them and is capable of making good passes out of those pick and rolls. One guy who's not good at doing those things is Potts, so you probably want to run some of those with Jimmy Butler. And probably to most effectively utilize Pat Spencer, you gotta use more pick and roll. He's a pick and roll player. And when you create space for him through the high screen and he's got some space to work with, that's where he can be most effective. Because in this game, he was really ineffective across the board. Completely useless. Same thing with GP2, right? He's a great rim runner. You gotta have him be more involved in simple pick and roll action and have him go downhill. The Warriors shot 28% from the three-point line in this game. Nobody is hitting any shots. They can't hit the side of a barn. Potts is hitting nothing. He's done nothing in terms of being consistent offensively in the playoffs so far. He's shooting like 37% from the field, shooting like 32% from the three-point line. If that, I think he may be shooting worse than that. The Warriors don't have the shooters to constantly be running motion offense, which is predicated on having great shooters because a lot of the actions is ultimately guys getting open for three-point shots. Rarely do you have guys finishing inside the paint in the motion offense because you're not running enough actions that are having guys going downhill. And that's what the Warriors need to do a lot more of until Steph Curry returns. Honestly, they could use a lot more of that even when Steph Curry does return. You need a mixed balance of both types of attacks. So those are some potential adjustments on the offensive end of the floor. Defensively, the Warriors need to be more disciplined against shooters. They were absolutely terrible in rotating to the shooters in this game. And that's ultimately what killed them in the second half especially. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dante DiVincenzo, Naz Reid left open all day and night, and they're shooting wide open shots all day and night, and they killed the Warriors. Those three guys alone shot 10 of 22 from the three-point line. And a lot of it has to do with overhelping on defense. And well, they would have to do less of that if they had bigger bodies on the floor and you can reliably guard the Timberwolves players more one-on-one. And the best way to play one-on-one, and this is a lot of traditional basketball now that we're talking about, is to have bigger size, more capable bodies that can defend one-on-one instead of having like three guards on the floor at the same time, constantly compensating, constantly having to overhelp, and then sleeping on the shooters. And again, the good news is that Steve did decide to put in some bigger guys in this game, try out a bunch of different guys. He basically had nothing to lose after that first quarter disaster. So in that second quarter, he tried Kevin Knox, he tried Trayce Jackson-Davis, and he didn't use Kevon Looney at all after that initial 3 minutes that he played where it was pretty awful because, well, again, you just can't expect him to anchor like a nonsensical lineup where there's no defense across the board. So formulate better lineup combinations. I mean, this almost felt like a preseason tryout. 14 guys in rotation in the first half of this game. But yes, I said this in the previous video, but Trayce Jackson-Davis was particularly effective against this Timberwolves team in the regular season when he was in the starting lineup and they won both of those games. I think he should be back in the starting lineup so that the Warriors can better establish themselves on the defensive end of the floor. We still haven't really seen the combination of Jimmy Butler, Draymond, and Trayce Jackson-Davis on the floor at the same time defensively. This is the playoffs. You must prioritize setting up your defense so that you don't get out to a 13-0 deficit to begin the game. And the best way to do that is to shore up your front court, especially now more than ever without Steph Curry on board. Better defense, better screening for Buddy Hield and Paz, the only guards to be on the floor, and just pray that those two guys are able to hit their shots. One thing for certain is with Jimmy Butler, Draymond, and Trayce Jackson-Davis on the floor at the same time, they are going to limit what the Timberwolves can get on the inside, in the paint. And you know, Anthony Edwards drove to the basket like 4 times against Trayce Jackson-Davis in this one. The first one, he got blocked. You know, that's the one where he fell over and Trayce ended up stepping on his foot. And you got to ask yourself, how many guys on this team can stop Anthony Edwards at the rim the way Trayce Jackson is capable of? Having said that, there were a couple of times where Anthony Edwards got in there and ended up drawing a foul on Trayce. Those were phantom calls. The refs were just giving it to him. If that was Steph Curry, he would never get that call. It's marginal contact. This is the playoffs. There's no way you're giving these soft-ass calls at the rim. Trayce went vertical like this and they called a foul on him 2 times. So you got to hope that the refs are honest in the follow-up games, especially with the Warriors due to play home games. But yes, if you can make it more difficult inside the paint with bigger bodies, that's going to close off the paint and that's going to put more pressure on the shooters. And when you start the game that way, it puts more pressure on everybody else, including the shooters that are coming off the bench. And then when Kevon Looney replaces Trayce at the center spot, make sure that Jonathan Kuminga isn't the power forward next to him. If anything, you should put Kuminga at the small forward spot and put Guy Santos at the power forward spot so that Guy Santos can do the power forward spot, go grab the rebounds and help Kevon Looney out to fortify the front court. And then hope that Kuminga can provide that scoring punch for you. But my guess is that Jonathan Kuminga is probably going to end up starting next to Jimmy Butler and Draymond. I just think that that's a much greater gamble for the team because Kuminga is kind of all over the map. I mean, literally, this is like the first time he's played really well. But again, if he is going to start, you just hope and pray that he gets off to a great start. In that third quarter, they did show some sign of life. But the thing about it is that Jimmy Butler was pretty aggressive to start that third quarter. And the thing about Jimmy Butler aggression is that it kind of comes and goes. I'm not sure that we can rely on that enough, especially with a guy like Jaden McDaniels on him. Jaden McDaniels is a very imposing defender. He is 6'9", has a long wingspan, and that's just the type of guy that can really bother a guy like Jimmy Butler, who's a little bit older now, and he just can't rise up over guys the way he used to. And at the end of the day, all that matters is that the Warriors are able to get at least 1 win in the following 2 games that are coming up at home. They just have to find a way to buy time until Steph Curry is able to return. Because once Steph Curry returns, I don't think the Warriors are going to lose another game to the Timberwolves. But if they cannot manage to get 1 win at home, and then they have to go back on the road in a game 5, and Steph Curry is still not ready to go, the series might just end in 5 games. And man, like I said, Paz has been absolutely awful on the offensive end of the floor. He's pretty much been a no-show. So I almost feel like he's due for a big game, especially at home. But honestly, it's a lot of pressure on a second-year player in the second round of the playoffs. That, of course, is a part of the reason why I always wanted a secondary trade after they got Jimmy Butler. Can't be relying on some combination of Paz, Moody, Buddy Hield, Jonathan Kuminga. Like, these are all very inconsistent players. You need another veteran, another guy you can consistently rely on in the playoffs, a guy that's been there, done that, is in the prime of his career, has a lot of defensive ability, a lot of toughness. That's the kind of secondary player the Warriors need. Imagine, for example, and this is just an example, imagine if the Warriors had it in their mind to go after somebody like Quentin Grimes. Think about how much better the Warriors would have been if they had a guy like that in rotation. But that, of course, is on nobody but the front office and their refusal to move anybody that is a young player. Obviously, it's something they're going to have to address when this season is over. But that's the current situation. That's what they have now. And Steve Kerr has to find a way to formulate the best combinations and not play a 14-man rotation. Now that he got a glimpse of which players can be useful in this series, keep it the starting 5. Again, I'm going to assume that Kuminga is going to end up in that starting lineup. So that's the starting 5. And then have Kevon Looney in rotation, Guy Santos in rotation, Trayce, and GP2. And again, they're going to have to play a different style of offense for these players to be effective. If you're not going to use pick and rolls enough, it may not be worth having Pat Spencer in there. But between all these guys that are going to be in rotation, make sure that they're consistently in bigger lineups so that they can be protected defensively. Simplify the offense. Having guys go downhill more, finishing inside the paint, opening up the shooters outside. Penetrate, kick out. Penetrate, kick out. I think that's the best way for the Warriors to play while Steph Curry is out of the rotation. Anyway, unfortunately, it's going to be a quick turnaround. The Warriors have to play again in a couple of days. I thought Steve Kerr was generally awful in this game in terms of his management. The guys he had in rotation to begin with, not knowing what to do or who to play in the first half. But if he can correct some of those issues and make some key adjustments, I do believe that the Warriors are capable of stealing one at home. Funny enough to say, steal one at home, but that's the situation with Steph Curry out of the equation. That's all I got for now. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.